Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me. This presentation was made as part of my studies at Moravian College in the class Political Science 225, Congress and the Presidency. First presentation, I'll be discussing President Obama and the Iran nuclear deal, better known as the JCPOA, meaning Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We'll talk about President Obama himself, then the deal in relation to the significance, legacy, public opinion, and its relationship to Congress. So a little bit about President Obama. He was the 44th president of the United States and served from 2009 to 2017. He was a member of the Democratic Party. Now, he inherited a very unstable situation for America. The economy was in collapse, or depression, and our reputation abroad was abysmal after President Bush's adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan and against the opinion of our allies. But when Obama left the presidency in 2017, he had an approval rating of 60% and had restored our reputation with our foreign allies, foreign nations, very much so because of this Iran nuclear deal. That played a large part in the legacy of his foreign policy. And though his first term was very, aggressive in terms of foreign policy in a bad way. We went into Libya, Syria, heightened the amount of troop levels in Iraq. His second term was much more diplomatic. He increased relations with Iran through this deal and restored relationships with Cuba. So both nations, historically enemies, now back on the table. So that was a lot about his legacy. Why does the JCPOA matter? Why are we still talking about this? Well, it's because it's relevant today. Obama, created it, but Trump destroyed it, and we'll get into that later. Now, with Biden in the presidency, it's up to him to decide and navigate the future of the JCPOA, and will we go back into the deal with Iran? And basically, that us going into that deal or not, coming back into the deal, will decide the future of our relationships with Iran, and if we will see these continued heightened tensions in the Middle East in relationship with Iran that have existed since Trump left the nuclear deal in 2018. So the background context for this nuclear deal. So Iran's nuclear program started in the 1970s and actually was constructed at the behest of the United States. We made their first facility. And that's because before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran was actually our ally. But after the Islamic Revolution, the hostage crisis, they were no longer our ally. They were an enemy in a way. And we, plumped on sanctions due to their status with us, as well as their human rights, and later their nuclear program. Now, in the 90s, we designated them as a state sponsor of terrorism. That very much heightened tensions with Iran, starting in the mid-1990s, because we put national and UN sanctions on them, arms embargo, etc. And that led to the Bush presidency inheriting a presidency where Iran and our relationships were very poor, and the Bush presidency was very war hawkish. They went into Iraq, they went into Afghanistan, and they wanted to go into Iran. They named Iran the axis of evil. But at the time, the Bush presidency was not in favor of negotiations with Iran in relationship to their nuclear program, or much so in anything. On the other side, Iran at the time had a very moderate reformist president, Khatami, who wanted negotiations, but one side was pro-negotiation, one wasn't. Then came Obama's first presidency, and Obama was open to negotiations. One of his selling points is he wanted to have better relationships with Iran and to end this ordeal concerning Iran's nuclear program. But unfortunately for President Obama, in his first term, President Ahmadinejad was elected in Iran, and Ahmadinejad was a hardliner. He very much increased hostility towards America and Iranian belligerency in the region, and that thwarted any negotiations, and tensions were getting higher. And that was because, though intelligence reports throughout the years had said that Iran was not actively choosing or moving to weaponize their nuclear program, they did have potentially the ability to do so. They had enough material, and if they so wanted, if they decided to rush for a nuclear bomb by 2015, the CIA, FBI, they all agreed that Iran could probably do so to create at least their first bomb in 2 to 3 months, and they had the material to do so, to create 8 to 10 bombs at given time. So Obama's prerogative going into the deal was to stop Iran from having a nuclear program, reel it back, increase monitoring, etc. And there was very good chance for war at the time. Israel had done a lot of assassinations in Iran of nuclear scientists, or there was a chance Iran would respond, and there was a fear that this would bring America into the fray, with American forces relayed all over the Middle East. At the same time, Europeans were very much so in favor of negotiations. They had economic interests in Iran, and they wanted to see stability in the Middle East. After the wars America started, and America under President Obama had the incentive to go alongside with the Europeans because that would be a way to rebuild our reputation abroad, which had been destroyed with the Iraq War, or the fallout with the Iraq War, and the fact that it had been based off lies. But what changed? What allowed Obama to go through with this nuclear deal in 2015? Well, during his second term, reformist and moderate in Iran, President Rouhani was elected. So finally, both sides were open to a nuclear deal. And this happened, as I said, in 2015, mid-2015. And Iran and the world's powers, called the P5+1, which were China, France, Germany, Russia, UK, and US, came together and reached a deal. And it limited Iran's nuclear program and increased monitoring in exchange for relief on nuclear sanctions. And specifically, this targeted their uranium, their facilities, and then a little bit more, but we'll go into just the uranium facilities. So in 2015, Iran had 20,000 centrifuges. That's what's used to create and then uranium and then enhance its percentage of enrichment. At the time, Iran was around just above 4%, and if you built that to 90% enrichment, you could use that to create nuclear bombs. And it's very easy once you reach 15, 20% to go from there to 20. But under the deal, Iran had to reduce from 20,000 to 5,000 centrifuges, and that was just enough to maintain the facility so it doesn't explode on them. And they weren't allowed to build any more centrifuges until 2026. Similarly, the uranium stockpile itself, 98% of it was sent to Russia to be destroyed or just not in Iranian hands. And they were left with only 2% of their stockpile, and it had to stay at 3.67% enrichment, just enough to create medical supplies. And they weren't allowed to increase their stockpile or increase that enrichment until 1931. Finally, Iran's major facilities. There were 3 major facilities: their heavy water plant called Arak, and 2 enrichment facilities called Fordo and Natanz. Under the deal, the Arak heavy water facility was very much redesigned, mainly with cement, blocking off, destroying lots of sections, and this basically meant that they could not create plutonium, the actual fissile material made in nuclear bombs. That alone made it almost impossible to weaponize the program. Their Fordo enrichment facility was redesigned so that it couldn't enrich uranium anymore, and it just became a normal tech center, and it's not allowed to be rebuilt until 2031. Similarly, Iran's not allowed to build another heavy water plant until 2031. This left Iran with only 1 enrichment facility, the Natanz one, and that allowed for America and the IAEA, its International Atomic Energy Agency, to very closely monitor Iran. If there's only one location you have to look at, it's very easy. At the same time, the IAEA was allowed to go anywhere they wanted in the country as long as they suspected Iran was breaking the deal or creating a secret site, which is very hard to do, but the fact that they could look around was very reassuring. Until 2031, if Iran failed to adhere to anything under the deal or anything the IAEA said they wanted, the 6 powers that had signed the deal, after 24 days of non-compliance, could re-sanction Iran. So there was a very big incentive for Iran to stick to the deal. Further, Iran was still under arms embargo and agreed to keep that there. So Iran was not allowed to use the now sanctions relief, the money returned to them, roughly $100 billion, to buy arms. So they had to use that for, just domestic purposes and however else you would use, your budget outside of military arms. Now, the significance. Was Obama right to do this with Iran? Very much so. Before 2015, as I said, there was a chance that Iran could push for a bomb if they felt threatened. And after the nuclear deal, tensions very much dropped off. Relations were really good with Europe, very stable with Iran. It seemed like we finally had peace. But after the deal, there was no chance of Iran getting nuclear weapons. They were monitored. Their Iraq facility was cemented. So they couldn't weaponize the program even if they wanted to, and they were being monitored. So there was peace in the region, and that was what Obama focused on. Now, the legacy. Well, basically, it was destroyed. It didn't last long. It lasted 3 years, and that's mainly because of President Trump. He unilaterally left the deal in mid-2018 and reimposed sanctions much tougher than prior on Iran and anyone who would trade Iran. He did this without evidence. The only nations that supported him were Israel and Saudi Arabia, who also didn't have evidence. So the reputation Obama had built abroad was very much destroyed, along with other things President Trump did. But this is one of the things that destroyed our reputation again. Why didn't he like it, though? He didn't like the timeline. He didn't like that Iran had until, only 2031 in a lot of cases before they can redo whatever they were doing. He thought they would, as soon as that ended, go back to doing what they were doing before, and now they had all the money they were given now. Uh, Obama considered this, when they made the deal, but his thinking and his administration's thinking was that this would be the time period to show Iran that it's better in your interest to be our friend than our enemy. Unfortunately, President Trump cut that early. He also didn't like it because it only focused on nuclear capabilities. President Trump and lots of Republicans wanted it to focus on Iran's other actions in the Middle East, proxies, militias, missile capabilities, but President Obama only focused on the nuclear capabilities. And he didn't focus on these other things. And that was in order because he focused on his priority. He also wanted to tear down pretty much anything related to Obama. Almost any legislation Obama did, like the Cuba, and anything domestic, Trump was against. So maybe there wasn't even a real reason. Because of that Obama, he wanted to get rid of it. Another reason is because his advisors were against it. Mike Pompeo and John Bolton were opposed to the nuclear deal and were Iran hawks. Both were in favor of bombing Iran. Later on, in 2020, when we came close to that after the assassination of an Iranian commander, they both pushed for war, but it was actually President Trump who backed off a little bit and said, let's not go through with that. Now, how about Congress? How is Congress involved? Well, a lot of people questioned how was Trump able to leave after we signed the deal, and many thought it was because President Obama didn't make it a Senate-confirmed treaty. It was only an executive agreement between him and foreign powers. But between 1977 and 1996, there were 4,000 executive agreements and only 300 Senate-confirmed treaties. So it wasn't unusual for President Obama to do this. And would it have changed anything if the Senate had confirmed the treaty? No, not really. It's not uncommon for presidents to go against even what Senate ratified, and there's examples of this. In 1978, President Carter did so with the 1954 Mutual Defense Treaty with Taiwan. He went out of that, even though it was Senate ratified, and Bush Jr. did the same thing in 2001 with the anti-ballistic missile treaty that was signed with Russia. He backed out of that. It was Senate ratified. And in fact, when Senator Barry Goldwater in 1978 opposed Carter's action, he tried to take it to the Supreme Court, and they refused to even consider it. So it seems that Congress, with the very little opposition they almost had zero opposition to Bush, and the Supreme Court, with them not deciding on these matters, it seems that the president has the right to leave any deal, regardless of whatever presidents before them did. Of course, it's going to come with consequences such as our reputation. After a year of Trump leaving the nuclear deal, Iran became more belligerent, and we basically had another Cold War in our hands. Oil shippings were being bombed, missiles were sent into Saudi Arabia, Israel was bombing Iranian soldiers in Syria, and it was very close to us being a war, especially when President Trump assassinated the Iranian commander. But Iran banked on President Trump not being elected again, and they were very much softer than expected in their response to the assassination. And they won out in this case. Biden has been elected, so we're going to be seeing what we do. And Biden promised in his candidacy that he would have no more nonsense in the Middle East, and he'd renegotiate with Iran. But the problem is, for both sides to come to the table, they both want different things. Iran, in order to come back to the deal, wants America to undo their sanctions they did. In their opinion, America left the treaty unilaterally, and only after that, Iran stopped adhering to aspects of the deal. So they want America to go get rid of their sanctions again, and then Iran will come back to the deal. Biden's the opposite. Biden wants them to come back to the deal because they've broken off from it a little bit. They started enriching again, building centrifuges again. He wants them to come back in order for him to get rid of sanctions. So it's, this both have different opinions. And last week, unfortunately, President Biden bombed several Iranian soldiers and allied militias in Syria, and that's re-heightened tensions again. Lastly, I'm going to cover the public opinion of the deal. When Obama did the deal, it was very controversial. The Republican side of Congress, which controlled Congress, was completely against it. And public opinion was, mixed as well. 33% were in support, 45% were against, 22% were unsure. That changed, though, within 3 years. When Trump left the deal, 53% of the public was against him leaving the deal. So it had become much more popular once it was shown to be working, rather than when it was just signed and there was doubt. In Iran, it was also very popular. There was 76 approval rating of the deal when it was signed, but now only 42% are support of re-going into it. And that's because a lot of Iranians have been are very disappointed in America, and they don't see any reason to come back into a deal that won't last for more than just a few years. Their economy is completely buckled under these new sanctions, and they see no reason to come back into it, and Iranians, being very prideful, see no reason to give up. So as far as it goes, unless we get back in this deal, we're going to have continued tensions with Iran. And this is very important. If this deal will decide the next decade or so of Iranian-American relations and if we're going to go to war or not, basically. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you all have a nice day.